for being with us today. So for those that aren't associated with the Net Impact chapter, we are the Columbia University Sustainability Management Net Impact chapter. And my name is Alyssa Ramirez. I am the Director of Projects for the chapter, and I will be co-moderating with Elizabeth Wilson, who is also a Director of Projects for the chapter. So today we have public and private changes in the transition to the Biden administration for the event today. And we have a few panelists with us today that I will introduce, and we are so honored to have them here. We have May Stevens, Larry Katz, Pavan Riali, and Emily Waffler with us today. Yes, thank you so much for taking the time and for all of your insight today. I'll go ahead and introduce each one of you. So May Stevens is an executive vice president at Signal Group and the chair of Signal Water. May provides strategic, environmental, and infrastructure policy expertise to a diverse range of corporate, municipal, and nonprofit clients. Most recently, she served as environmental policy advisor to Senator Ben Cardin, handling the senator's responsibilities as the top Democrat on the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, including staffing the senator during the crafting and the passage of the FAST Act and the 2016 and 2018 Water Resources Development Act bills. During her 7-year tenure on Capitol Hill, May was responsible for the Senate Democrats' response to the Flint water crisis and focused most of her time on the intersection of water, equity, and affordability, and generally how to make cities and towns even better for the people who live and work there. She also spent 9 years working with various nonprofit environmental organizations and think tanks, and May holds a master's degree from our very own Columbia University and a bachelor's degree from the George Washington University. So thank you so much for being here today, May. We also have Pavan Riali. Pavan Riali is a senior consulting engineer with over 10 years of experience working for governments and consulting organizations across the world. Pavan specializes in energy management consulting, energy policy, and sustainability. And he is currently consulting for New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, on the Real-Time Energy Management Program. He has an MS in Sustainability Management from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in Electrical Engineering. So thank you so much. We also have Larry Katz, who has over 35 years of engineering, business development, and energy consulting experience. Over the last decade, Larry has worked on energy efficiency projects and provided advisory services that include identifying, analyzing, and presenting recommendations for commercial, institutional, industrial, and multifamily building retrofits. He evaluates new energy efficiency technology and performs energy savings and carbon emissions analysis for a variety of projects. Larry is the lead engineer, energy engineer for the NYC Accelerator program with a focus on long-term planning for deep energy retrofits. The accelerator, offered by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, offers free technical guidance to help building owners, managers, and operators implement energy conservation measures. Larry holds a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Tufts University, as well as a Certified Energy Manager, Certified Measurement and Verification Professional, and Renewable Energy Professional accreditations from the Association of Energy Engineers. So thank you so much for being here today. And then we also have Emily Waffler. She is a consultant with the sustainability advisory firm South Pole. At South Pole, Emily provides environmental footprinting, sustainability strategy development, and climate risk services for corporate clients. Additionally, Emily serves as the greenhouse gas accounting expert for South Pole's North America region. And prior to South Pole, Emily worked with private equity ESG consulting firm Malk Partners, and also with the Coalition for Private Investment in Conversation. Emily holds a Master's of Engineering in Biological and Environmental Engineering and a BS in Environmental Science and Sustainability from Cornell University. So thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to dive into conversation about the what's expected to change in the public and private sector with the Biden administration and the sweep of new changes made in the sustainability sector thus far. So we have seen, from day one, new initiatives that have been signed to recent announcements to the $2 trillion infrastructure package that was announced last Wednesday. So I will pass it along to Liz Wilson, who will take it away.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, and thank you again to all our panelists for being here today. So just a quick rundown of how this is going to work. I'm going to spend about half an hour to 40 minutes asking some questions that we've prepared on the topic, and then we will open it up to the floor for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, those of you who are here watching today, then feel free to either type them in the chat or hold on until the end when we open up for questions, and then you can raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call on you to ask those questions directly to the panelists. So without further ado, I think we'll dive in. And our first question is, we'd really like to know if you foresee any significant changes in your field or your particular area of work as we continue this transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, and if you do see some significant changes, what those are. And I'd love to start off with May, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. First of all, thanks for having me. This is so great to chat with you guys. And also congrats to the ESP folks who just did their final presentations. That was a very tough day for me. So I'm glad you guys have that out of the way. You guys can just relax and watch this. And I hope you have good questions and your brain is not in mush right now, because it was for me for sure. But anyway, I think, that's a really good question about what's going to happen in the transition between Trump and Biden. I think, as you said in the intro, I really focus on water and water infrastructure directly. And that's one of the, that's like the biggest focus that I have in my job. And so I think one of the things that's important to think about is infrastructure is very, very much related to sustainability, right? Both thinking about how we have funded infrastructure in the past, how we're going to fund it in the future, what we are going to fund and where, what those projects look like. Are they made for the climate of the future? Are they designed for the climate of the past? All of those things, right? Equity is a huge focus as well of the Biden administration. So just thinking about that for a second, and then, in this $2.25 trillion infrastructure package, that other $250 billion is a lot of money as well. So I'm excited to put that in there as well. But that compared to, just in the first couple months of the Biden administration, compared to the last administration, President Trump, talked a lot about infrastructure. He sort of famously, inside the Beltway, a lot of jokes about famously a lot of infrastructure weeks, where he would talk a lot about infrastructure in order to sort of change the conversation in Washington from, topics that he didn't really want to talk about. That's sort of a tried and true method. That's sort of the PhD of communications, is being able to change the conversation like that. So, from his perspective, I think he was doing a great job for what he wanted to accomplish. But for people who really care about infrastructure, especially because infrastructure is such a bipartisan issue, we really didn't want to see it sort of tied up in a, sort of partisan divide. And really not much got done on infrastructure over the last 4 years. There was one water infrastructure bill. Usually we do them every 2 years. We just didn't even do one in 2020. So hoping that we get back on track and actually make some gains from some of the things that we weren't able to accomplish over the last 4 years. And like specifically for water infrastructure, that Biden infrastructure plan has $111 billion over 5 years for water infrastructure. That sounds like a lot of money. Maybe people aren't really sure. To give some context, that's about 5 times as much money as we spend every year on water infrastructure right now. Is a little bit over 5 times. So that would be a huge improvement, especially because it's a sustained, it's sustained over 5 years. It's not just a one-time payment. We're going to do it this year and then be done with it. So that I think is going to be a big shift for us.
Great, thanks. And then Larry or Pavan, would you like to talk from the sort of energy perspective on that theme?
I'm glad to go, if that's okay. Pavan?
Yeah, go
ahead. So first, thank you for having me at this event. Really pleased and honored to be here. Alyssa, thank you so much for reaching out. Very glad to participate. And great to see all of you. In my perspective on the energy front, I look at the past 4 years and quite notably, our country pulled out of the Paris Accord. The Environmental Protection Agency took aim at regulations that they tried to do away with to help improve some bottom lines at the risk of hurting the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And those are being reversed now, obviously, with rejoining the Paris Agreement for one thing. But interestingly, I also find it notable that over the past 4 years, the Department of Energy's Energy Star program remained funded and active. The Department of Energy National Labs continue to do their research and find new and innovative ways to capture sunlight into transform into energy, and a variety of other measures to take a big chunk out of the growing need for reducing emissions. And Fortune 500 companies and, well, Fortune 3000 companies alike, but the biggest companies especially have been leading the charge in fighting climate change, and it's best for their business, it's best for their marketing, it's best for their name, and to satisfy what is a driving need, especially among the younger consumers, but really across the board. And lastly, I'll note recently, and this had been in the works, not just because President Biden is now in office, but when Shell Oil Company announces they will be net zero emissions by 2050 and align with the Paris Agreement, it says a lot that the recognition on the economic side is becoming more evident, that if companies want to still be around, they will need to help fight climate change and do their part. So, that's where I see the hopefulness over the last 4 years of what's continued and what's expanded, and that I see that just becoming bigger and bigger under this current administration.
Great, and thanks for that positive note. Pavan, do you have, is that similar to sort of your experience of this transition so far?
Yes. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm also a SUMA student, so I know how hard it is to put this thing together, and I appreciate all your efforts, and it's really nice to see all of you here. Yes, I definitely will mirror what Larry just said. What I've noticed in the last 3-4 years is due to the lack of leadership at federal level, a lot of state players took over. States like New York were leading the charge in terms of really good energy efficiency programs that came in. A lot of funding came in from the state budgets, and not just at the federal, not just at the state level, but there are a lot of city players. Like New York City has a really good program, 80 by 50, and things like that, that came in because of lack of leadership from the top. But thanks to the change right now, we are hoping to see really good changes coming in from the top. There are a few things that state governments can do, and there are a few things that city governments can do. But when federal government comes in and says, "Okay, we're giving you a tax credit," that's at a different level. For example, in the current Biden plan, they're expanding the ITC and PTC for solar and wind, which is a huge development. A lot of industry players have been waiting for that to come in. The investment tax credit and performance tax credits that were expanded for the next 10 years. And there's also a huge push for clean energy retrofits in the plan, which I think will be also really helpful. Again, it's still a plan, and there's this famous School of Rock, I think, video, which talks about plan, which becomes a bill to become an act. There are so many things that happen, and hopefully all of this filters through that, and hopefully we can see all these changes. But yeah.
Great, that's a really interesting insight. And Emily, I mean, you're sort of coming at all this from a slightly different perspective and perhaps a more broader sustainability mindset. So I wonder if the changes have been so far, or the changes that you foresee are sort of less profound or more profound, or if you have sort of any insight as to how you think that's going to go in your industry.
Definitely, and I think it's a really great and complex question. Before diving in, I too want to thank everyone for having me. It's really an honor just to be able to be here and talk about such an important topic. But I really have to agree with Larry in a lot of ways. In 2020, especially, we saw a huge amount of interest growing from corporate clients to become more sustainable. And that was obviously before any Biden administration. So we've already kind of seen a lot of corporate clients already taking action to be more climate sensitive, develop sustainability strategies, and really take action. So, of course, for those companies that are perhaps in the energy space or the vehicle space, we are seeing a bit more sensitivity to the Biden administration's policies. They're thinking a lot more immediately about transition risk. How are we going to respond? How do we restructure? How do we really bulk up our sustainability strategy in advance of these policies? But for the rest of our clients, right, the consumer goods, the tech companies, it's a little bit more distant. And I think the effects are a little bit less defined. I think obviously you're seeing kind of this cultural effect where you're getting a lot more signals from the government. It perks everyone's ears up a little bit more. But I think for a lot of clients, at least in my line of work, it's a little bit less defined. And of course, from the consulting perspective, we're thinking about it and we're trying to align our services in advance of a lot of these changes, thinking about things like disclosure services, right? How are we going to align with any corporate climate disclosure mandates from the Biden administration, improving and aligning to best practices for things like TCFD, making sure that our clients are fully aware of any disclosures that they might be subject to. And granted, this isn't the main focus of a lot of the infrastructure bill, which, as we've already discussed, is really aligned with energy and water, but it is a part that, we're a little bit more in tune to on the corporate climate side. And the other being, we are thinking about modeling those downstream effects. So for some of our clients that are perhaps in consumer goods or in tech, and they want to set a 20-year strategy thinking, okay, what investment do you need now, but how much can we expect the infrastructure around you to change? How can we model that into your cost protections 20, 30 years down the line? So it really depends on the industry, and it really depends on the client as well.
Yeah, that's great insight. And I think that sort of summarizes nicely the two perspectives we've seen from the other panelists, that really it depends what industry. For some industries, this is a big change, and for some it's the more corporate driven side, it's sort of already happening, right, regardless of what's going on politically. So perhaps, Emily, we can stay with you for the next question. I mean, we've talked now in some detail about this new bigger infrastructure plan that Biden announced last week, and the fact that it's focusing largely on energy and water and infrastructure. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the fact that it's very focused towards these things, and whether this is sort of a beneficial way to approach sustainability by prioritizing these things, or whether you would have loved to see sort of a broader focus on other sustainability issues, and maybe a broader focus on the private sector, or, you know, sort of the pros and cons of keeping it narrow to these main issues versus opening it and having sort of broader policies towards greater sustainability issues.
Definitely. And I think that's a really, really great question. And on one hand, you know, I'm a student of environmental science and sustainability and engineering. So I look at our global climate crisis and where most of our emissions are coming from, and they are coming from the energy sector. This is really, if you're going to target your initiative somewhere, this is the place to take the biggest bite out of. So from a sheer practicality standpoint, and of course we all know Washington, how things are right now, if you're going to go for one thing, I definitely see how you know, focusing on energy and vehicles and infrastructure, that's a really surefire way to really make a lot of progress. So from that pure science perspective, yes, I think it's doing a great job. Of course, though, you know, as a consultant working in the corporate space, I think there's always more we can be doing. And I think they're touching a little bit on it right now with talks of, as I mentioned before, disclosures, carbon tax. And I think it'll really come down to execution and thinking about specific, tangible, actionable items once policy actually goes through. How will this look on the ground? And I think disclosures is a really great example of that. So currently we have things like net zero, TCFD, all these buzzwords floating around, and a lot of confusion of what they mean, how to apply it, and clear, consistent ways to apply these methodologies and disclosure IDs across, you know, geographies, across industries. So what I'd like to see, and this could still happen as, you know, the policy matures and develops and gets implemented, but I'd really love to see clear corporate disclosure guidance. Just to make, you know, things a little bit more easier and helpful for our clients. But on the other hand, too, I think corporate disclosures are really the first step to broad corporate climate action, right? So when you have companies publicly disclosing their footprints, what actions they're taking to mitigate climate risk, it just allows companies to be aware of what their footprint is and knowing what their climate impact is. And it's shocking, even in 2020, how many clients come to us and they still have never done a GHG accounting footprint, and they don't really know what their impact is. So first, by encouraging companies to take inventory of what their impact is, and then disclosing it publicly, I think is a really key second step in encouraging actions. It just increases transparency, a little bit more awareness, but as I alluded to earlier, market and competition is one of the main driving factors for clients to take action. So if everyone's publicly disclosing, they can see what their competitors are doing, they can see if they measure up, if they don't, and that encourages, of course, then broader sustainability strategy and broader climate action. So in short, I think it's a great start. We'd love to see some specifics in regards to disclosures and corporate climate action.
Great. May, I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that issue as well, because obviously water infrastructure is a big part of this, and whether you were sort of surprised or pleased to see the focus there, or whether you're expecting more. Or...
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the largest ever investment by the federal government in water infrastructure in the history of the country, like going back to George Washington, like that's how big this is. So it is huge and enormous for water infrastructure. And obviously I'm very excited about that. So yeah, but what I think that I feel like I would want to think about your question in a little bit different way. So like you asked us if we wish that there was a bigger focus on sustainability. And yes, I always want there to be a bigger focus on sustainability because that's what I care about, right? But this is called the American Jobs Plan, right? And the reason that we have this bill in the first place is because there are net 10 million people that are out of jobs. It is worse than the 2008 recession. right? So this is now the new worst recession since the Great Depression, right? It is like many economic indicators show that it's going to last longer than the 2009 recession. And frankly, if you're from a rural community, that recession never, like you never recovered before this new one happened. So that's actually really a big problem, right? And so for a jobs plan, this is amazingly, you know, the focus on sustainability is incredible, right? The fact that like anybody would put those two together, and they really, you know, it really shows that Biden really understands that sustainability is a job creator, right? Is huge for us. So I am very excited about that. I did want to just mention one thing that Emily pointed out about the disclosures. I am super excited about that as well. That's like a sort of pet excitement thing that I have. I don't work on it in my day job, but I am actually like just very interested in general. And I think that's something that the SEC can do without Congress. So that's something to look forward to in the future for sure. Didn't need to be in this plan because they can just do it anyway. And so I'm excited for that. I feel like it's coming. So
great. That's a really important point to remember. You know, the primary purpose of this bill, and I think we're all delighted to see the combination of these issues and like you said, the recognition that sustainability does create jobs, and it makes sense for so many different issues and so many people. Pavan, I wondered if you have something different to say on this coming from an energy perspective, and given that, you know, this is obviously a lot of investment in energy, and that must be a pretty exciting thing for you and your work.
It is. It definitely is a huge investment, as May mentioned. It's maybe not as huge as the water infrastructure investment, but definitely they have done a good job in baking these different parts of energy infrastructure into different sectors. For example, the largest investment that's happening is into something called the CARE infrastructure. It's about $400 billion. The second one is affordable housing. But if you go into the details, about $27 billion of that money is going into clean energy retrofits and distributed energy resources and weatherization of buildings, which was satanized by the past president. But things like that have definitely, they have huge potential. And I think that will definitely drive investment from the private players as well into the market. And I think that will also show the leadership of US. For example, there is the expansion of EV charging stations that's happening. I think there are about 20,000 charging stations across the country right now. The plan is planning to expand it to 500,000. It's about 20 times the current infrastructure. So if there are so many charging stations, you can expect to see the automotive industry to expand their offerings and also expand the number of electric cars that you see in the market. So things like that will happen. And also during the French Revolution, there was this saying, when France sneezes, Europe catches cold. Right now, it's the US in that condition. When US sneezes, the world catches cold. And we have seen that definitely with the Paris Climate Accords. When US dropped out, there has been sort of scramble for who will be the leader. US is now back in the driving seat, and once we start building this infrastructure, this will definitely be a global phenomenon as well, I hope.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Larry, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to touch on something Pavan just said, and it relates to my work and how my work would better be supported going forward. Pavan pointed out a need for investment in EV stations, as well as the investment in affordable housing. And you think about how different those two baskets of money need to be spent on the future with growing numbers of electric vehicles versus buildings that are in danger of not providing enough heating as well as cooling for low middle income families. So in my work, and the New York City Accelerator has a focus on serving affordable housing areas for equitable distribution of energy advisory services. So our services are funded by the city and therefore free to stakeholders. And if you think about how market rate owned housing, commercial and institutional industrial properties have probably more money to spend, it would be easier for us to help them to implement energy efficiency measures. But what we really need to do is help those who don't have a sustainability staff, who are the 20, 25 unit, possibly low middle income buildings in various neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, to say, here's how we can help you to find funding, incentives to finally stop burning number 4 heating oil inefficiently to generate steam, and look at ways to either electrify or some combination that would help the building envelope and to add renewables at some point. So it's the equitable distribution that I'd like to see helped, and maybe a shared cost model that would have people who can afford upgrades, retrofits to be funded somewhat, but people who have difficulty affording can be funded mostly. And that would be the equitable way, and it would help a market that needs help the most.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know those of us based in New York City, I know I at least have been heartened by the growing sort of focus on this in New York City in terms of energy efficiency and clean energy. And I hope that is the case across the rest of the country, and it will continue to grow. I'm sure that's what we're all hoping. And I hope in our careers, and some of us can make that happen. So I want to be aware of time and make sure we have plenty of time for audience questions. So I'm going to skip ahead, and we're all, most of us are students here, and we will either be graduating soon or not so soon or at some point. And I would love to hear your advice for those of us who are looking to start a career in these sorts of areas, and how we can be successful both in terms of our career and in terms of advancing these this work and these issues that we all care so much about. So perhaps, Pavan, I'll start with you for this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I guess I have the most experience with this of the panel since I come from the program. So I would say what the market expects from a sustainability professional, if you are interested in going into that, is a weird mix of generalist experience, but some specialized knowledge in a specific area. For example, I was looking at sustainability analyst roles when I started, and they would like someone with either a communications experience or a specialized reporting experience. Although the role is looking at overall sustainability, they would still want people with a specific area of expertise. So maybe my advice would be to pick that lane, pick a specific lane where you want to focus. I had a lot of experience working in the energy sector, so I was able to jump back into that, but not everyone might have that. So one way to develop that is to do internships and fellowships. I did this EDF Climate Core Fellowship in 2017. I don't know if the date is still, I think it's past the date for the next summer, but the one after that would be a good place to start. They have really good programs where they connect you with different industries, and you get to learn on the field. And you can definitely use that experience to pitch for jobs that might not be exactly in your area of expertise.
That's great advice. And I know the EDF Climate Core Fellowship is definitely a popular one among Columbia students. Emily, perhaps you can go next and give us your take.
Definitely. And I have to agree with Pavan on a lot of things in terms of being a generalist, but yet also a specialist. But focusing really just on the job search process, I think one of the best things students these days can do is just identify a few of those key skills or experiences. So whether that be GHG accounting knowledge or climate risk advisory or TSCFD, whatever it is, I think that really does set students apart in the job search, especially because, you know, as this becomes increasingly more popular, there's a lot more candidates from all walks of life wanting to go into the sustainability space. But the good news is the industry is also expanding. So I would just encourage students really just to keep that in mind, and especially because there's a lot of new companies starting up every day. The last two places I worked at were both relatively new firms in the United States. South Pole's been around for a while, but it just opened up its New York location, I guess, 2 years ago now. So there's a lot of these different companies out there that are looking to hire more talent, and they're just doing it in different ways. Maybe they're not always on LinkedIn or on all the job boards, but they're just posting on their own websites. So I would just encourage students, A, to get some of that technical specialized experience so that they can bring it in with the knowledge that there's a lot of communication skills and generalist skills that really are beneficial in this field, and also just sticking to it, right? I think it's definitely in this career path that this is what you want to do. It's much easier to jump into sustainability and stick with it than going somewhere else and transition back, just because, like I said, it is getting really popular. So stay the course and yeah, keep at the Google search. It'll hopefully be fruitful, and you know, we're hiring every day is how I like to see it.
Thanks for the positive and encouraging words. Nay, do you have some thoughts to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I can talk from the perspective of Washington, D.C. I've been working in the DC ecosystem for about 20 years. And both, and when I say DC ecosystem, I mean both on the Hill, working for members of Congress, but then also for nonprofits who lobby the federal government, right? There are a lot of folks, people say lobbying, but I think nonprofits use the word advocacy or advocates. You're still a registered lobbyist when you do that. Don't fool yourself. But I'm a registered lobbyist and I'm a nice person, so it's fine. But I think if you're thinking about DC jobs and you're thinking about how can I get involved in the sort of policymaking side, and I would encourage you to do that for two reasons. One, because if you think of the federal government as a giant company, they are, you know, the largest company in the world, right? And if you could make that more sustainable, that would be incredible, right? We always think about making, you know, the giant companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook like really sustainable, which is amazing, and we should. But there's also the federal government that we could do a lot in that direction as well. That would really trickle down to everybody. And I think so. And the second reason that I want to encourage people to think about getting jobs in Washington is because we're hiring like crazy right now, especially for jobs that care about sustainability and the environment. The Biden administration has a couple thousand jobs to fill. Those jobs will be filled mostly by people who have like previous government experience or, you know, either from Capitol Hill or previous administrations. They've worked at think tanks or they're, you know, professors in, you know, various places that, you know, maybe they've been in and out of DC for a while. But those jobs, like pulling those senior level folks over to the administration, leave a lot of openings where they came from. And so all of those jobs are open. All of the junior level jobs in the administration, there's obviously lots of jobs for people who have, you know, just a couple years of experience and a master's degree. So you guys are right there, right? You're a perfect fit for those jobs. And then also, you know, all of the nonprofits and that whole advocacy world, all of those think tanks, they're also hiring up because of this renewed interest on sustainability. So it's way more jobs than just the couple thousand that Biden gets to, you know, hire for. It's also just in general, a lot of money is flooding into DC. And so the advice that I would give folks, if you want to think about moving to Washington and thinking about these types of jobs, is advice that I'm like 98% sure that it was Jenna Fisher who said this from The Office. But she said that she thinks of it as going on 100 auditions before she lands a job. And so if she's, at her third or fourth audition, she's like, it's fine. I have 96 or 97 more to go before I'll get a job. And that way she doesn't think about every audition as like the one to get her the job or not. And I think it's really important to take that long view, especially in Washington, because there are so many jobs available, but there are also so many, it's a really competitive place, right? And so you want to just apply for as many positions as possible, be as flexible as you can be. And then on positions, and then once you're here and you have a position, then it's much easier to get a different position. You can easily, switch jobs after a year or so. If you decide, I'm interested in this, but I'm more interested in this other thing instead, or I want to try it from a different angle. So that's really, that's, sort of the advice that I would give is just apply to everything and don't give up. Especially don't give up after like 5 or 6 applications. You definitely need a lot.
That's great advice. And I know a lot of the club are interested in DC. So I'm sure people are really happy to hear that and also be reminded of that sort of trickle down effect as everyone gets hired over to the new administration and new positions opening up. So Larry, last but not least, what are your thoughts for all of those people out here doing those 100 auditions?
Well, first of all, anytime you can be on a webinar, seminar, and have a Jenna Fisher mention from The Office, it's a great day. Absolutely. So thanks for that, May. I'll say this, there's so many different aspects of work you can do in sustainability. There's data analysis, problem solving, innovation, policy, economics. And what I would suggest is, to have your focus, as Pavan mentioned, and then when you are discussing job opportunities with people in your network as well as interviewing, I would also suggest having a broad understanding of major issues. And it's not that you have to have a specific opinion about something, but having a perspective beyond we need to reduce carbon, which is true in spades. Having a sense that says this is a time when a lot of jobs are needed, as was mentioned earlier. This is a time when we have to think about water management, not just carbon reduction. We have to think of the whole ecosystem, and we have to protect the work that we're doing. The last thing I want to see in 4 years is that there's another change in an administration and they start reversing all the things that we're now trying to reverse from the past 4 years. So having those kind of perspectives and having a conversation about it, I think, is really valuable. I've interviewed lots of folks, and in my experience, talking with someone who's just generally knowledgeable, I mean, you're all from this Columbia program, you're obviously all very smart. You can learn anything. It's having that passion and bringing that to the table with an understanding of the overall environment that we're working in and the industry. So that would be my advice.
Thank you so much. That's really great advice and words of wisdom from all of you. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's trying to soak up as much of that advice as possible. So now I would love to open it up to the audience for questions. So if you have questions, please raise your hand or type one in the chat, and I will call on you to ask your questions. I'm sure we've covered a lot in our discussion. So I'm sure something has piqued someone's interest somewhere, and okay, Darshak.
Yeah, thanks for calling on me. Thank you all for coming to talk to us here at Columbia. I guess my question is, how did you guys find your calling? So for me, I've worked at a large bank for like 7 years, but I've decided to make this shift to the sustainability side. And this is my first year in the program. And I'm just trying to figure out, the space is so huge. There's so many things to do. How did you each individually find your own calling? Because I come from like a banking background. So like I want to do things that are in finance, but I don't know if that's the right calling or if it's the public side, like May mentioned, and working in government. Like I really can't figure out what I want to do, and everything just looks so interesting. So how did you guys find your calling and figure out what you wanted to do?
You're spoiled for choice. Panelists, does anyone want to jump on that
I
question?
can jump in here. I feel like I had a same type of crisis when I was figuring my life out, and I'm still figuring out, so I can't speak too confidently. But I mean, I started off studying political science and journalism, and turning away from that to study first science and then engineering. So I did a full 360, and then thought I wanted to go into finance and conservation investing, and that's something I'm still passionate about. But then moved from that to consulting. So I've run the same sphere of questions and different experiences. And I think for me, what really helped identify what would be right for me was first assessing, what was a priority for me. Obviously, impact was one, but what kind of impact, where in this, weird balance that we have of government, private sector, communication, science, do I fit? For me, that really came from the corporate sector. I liked the speed of it. I liked the clients I'd get to work for. And then also thinking about, okay, what am I good at and what do I enjoy doing? Because sometimes those aren't the same thing. So obviously, I come from a more data analytics background and engineering background, and a lot of that really I enjoyed. And some of it I was good at, but not all of it was something I wanted to be doing every single day of my life. And so for me, thinking about, okay, I like to do some number crunching and problem solving and design work, which I get to do with a lot of the work that I do, thinking about how to develop a strategy or an accounting method. But then I also enjoy communicating. So consulting was a really natural fit of saying, okay, I'm going to solve a problem, engineer a solution, and then work in communicating and advocating that to a corporate client. So for me, it was identifying those three things: what you're good at, what you like, and kind of what impact you want to have, or what are your guiding values.
I'll just add that if you imagine when you get up each day, I'm going to do 10 hours of X, how does that really make you feel? And be honest about it. And, Darshak, you might enjoy financing, and maybe it's become mundane, or you're wondering if you're making enough impact. So financing energy efficiency projects, financing infrastructure, financing with new launching programs like New York City is launching PACE, which you may be familiar with, and that is probably going to be announced in a few weeks on Earth Day. So, finding that combination, I think, of the things that you're passionate about and things that you're good at doing, and merging them together, kind of like what Emily said, I think can be really worthwhile.
Yeah. I just really quickly would add, well, first of all, I feel like I'm learning a lot about how to pick my own life choices here. So thanks, guys, for that. But I think I also would just say that that I would just be really careful about putting a lot of pressure on yourself. Like, the job that you get after you graduate is not the last job you will ever have in your life. And in fact, I would advocate that maybe you should keep that job for a year to two, and then try a different job, and then try a different job. And if you think about it in that way, then you'll have 10 jobs in the next 20 years. You're going to work for, I don't know how old you are, but say you're 25, you're going to work for 40 years, right? Then that's, and also we're all going to work for way longer than 65, because Social Security is not going to be there for our generation. So, okay. But if you work, from 25 to 65 and you have 10 jobs in your first 20 years, you can spend the second 20 years spending 20 years in the job that you like. But now you've had the opportunity to figure that out, right? So I would really caution. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself when I graduated undergrad, and then kind of again when I graduated Columbia. But just to think about this is the job that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in, and it better be the best job I could ever possibly find. First of all, you're not really going to know that until you even get in the job in the first place, right? You might also find that you're finding the things that you're really passionate about, you're really excited about, you're good at, you're making the impact that you want to make, and your boss is terrible, right? That's not a thing you're going to know until you get there and you start working. And then you're like, wow, actually, I need to pick a different firm or whatever, right? So I think that you will feel a lot better if you just take a little bit of pressure off and realize I'm just going to do this thing and I'm going to try it out. And if I don't like it, who cares? Get a different job. So
I'll also add from May's comments, thanks for reminding me. I've had 3 careers.
yeah.
I was a electronics design engineer doing chip level design work for communication systems. I then went into business development in the telecommunications area, selling various equipment and solutions and services. And when I lost my job and my career, basically 13 years ago, in the 2008 market crash, I had to do something else. And I chose energy efficiency because it seemed worthwhile, and it kind of related in a way of how power is distributed, the way telecommunications networks are built. So that evolved into my third, and I trust my final career in energy efficiency and energy engineering. So no one could have told me 30 years ago this is where I'd be, but I'm super glad I'm here.
Thanks, everyone. And I do want to get.
I can just add
Oh, yeah.
one last part. You're already in the program, so I feel like you already found your calling. And there are ways in which you can make a difference even without actually being in that specific role. My current job and my previous job were not advertised on any LinkedIn or any job boards. I found them by talking to people and getting into the role and sort of changing it to align with sustainability. You can go into one of the largest banks that you can get into based on your financial background and work on financing programs that Larry was talking about, or changing the job itself from within the bank or within your financial institution. So you can always pave the path, and sustainability gives you that opportunity to do that. So
That's a great point. Rachel, did you want to ask your question? I think this will be our last question.
Sure. Thank you to all the speakers today. This was fantastic. I know we only have a few more minutes, so but I just wanted to ask where you think public-private partnerships are going to go in the next few years, especially with the Biden administration. I came out of undergrad around the time when Obama came in, and there was this huge surge in energy in the city about public-private partnerships, and it was exciting. And I see so many parallels right now with what's going on. Do you think we're going to see an expansion of it? What are the pitfalls? What are you excited about? And thank you again.
Whoever wants to jump in, then go ahead.
I can start while my co-panelists gather their thoughts. Don't leave me hanging, guys. I think public-private partnerships, I think you are completely right that when Obama came into office, especially with the Recovery Act, a lot of people were really excited about P3s. I work on some of the largest P3s in America as well. So it's really fun to see that sort of growing. I think there's a lot more P3s in the transportation space. And I think there's a lot more appetite for them in the transportation space than there is in the water space. I think that the reason for that is that it's a really good talking point that water should be free and it should be owned by the public. It should be, sort of like a public good. Yes, right. But also I actually don't care who sends the water into my tap as long as it's clean and I can afford it. Lots and lots of things that I need to survive, like housing, food, shelter, clothing, all of the things, energy to keep me, warm in the winter and the air conditioning in the summer, because Washington has terrible summers. Those are all provided by private companies. And I need them to survive. So obviously I'm okay with that. I'm probably going to be okay with water being provided by a private company as well. And we see that all over the country. There's a ton of private water companies that handle utilities. That being said, I think that public sentiment is turning against that in the water space. And so I think there's going to be less and less of that going forward just because of that public sentiment. But I do think that, there is an opportunity for public-private partnerships in general in the water space in terms of, maybe the city owns the pipes, but the operating of the plant, right? The managing of the plant is contracted out because that's expensive and you need economies of scale for it, right? Or maybe, and obviously private companies don't own the like source water. It's not like they're buying up the water in the river, right? So the city still owns that. I think that's already happening. I think it's going to continue to happen. And I think in the transportation space, it's way, way, way more likely, right? And we see those all over the country. There is an equity issue as well in that. So a lot of the P3s that we're seeing in the United States in the transportation sector are sort of, like toll lanes, right? Where the private company will build the toll lane and then they will get the revenue over X number of years. It reduces traffic and it also, and it may actually like increase electric vehicles. But at the same time, it's, owned and operated by a public or by a private company until, X number of years when it transitions back over to the state or the city or whatever. That seems to be like a really good way of investing in infrastructure when you don't have the government spending $2.25 trillion on infrastructure. Now with all this federal investment, there's confusion and sort of concern about whether or not that's going to crowd out the private investment. I actually don't think so. I think that private investment goes up when the federal government invests in things. I did a report for a think tank, seems like a lifetime ago, but it was like, I don't know, 9 or 10 years ago from Third Way was the name of the think tank. And it looked at private sector investment in clean energy and what happened during the Recovery Act and then afterward. And it basically showed that private sector investment in clean energy skyrocketed when the federal government passed ARRA or the Recovery Act. And as that money ran out, the federal or the private investors pulled back. And so I think there is a good precedent for that. If that, I don't know if that carries over into other sectors. I would assume that it probably would. So I think that there is a real appetite for this in a lot of places, but you have to structure it in a way that's equitable because, for toll lanes, right? If you don't have extra money to pay to be in the fast lane, then you want to make sure that there's other ways for people to get, to where they are going, right? If they don't have the extra cash to pay. I think we can do that equitably. I think there's solutions to those problems, but I think we just have to actually like address the problem. Now I've given you all time to answer this question, so.
And we are at 1:02, so if anyone needs to hop off, then please feel free. But if panelists, you have a minute or two to just add your thoughts, then I'm sure we'd all love to hear them.
Yeah, I can add to that. I definitely agree with May that when public investment comes in, private investment also increases. The program I'm working on right now, Real-Time Energy Management Program, we give a 30% incentive for buildings to install a building management system. Now, it's just 30% incentive, but it's a $50 million program, but it's pulling in almost $150 million in, from the private sector. It doesn't look like it, but government is only investing $50 million, and it would gain it back in terms of the energy savings that are reaped by the buildings that are also translated to lesser investment into additional infrastructure by the grid and things like that. So there is definitely an advantage of the government putting in the money and the private following up with that. So yeah, I definitely agree with May on that. And yeah, also there's the other example of Tesla. People talk about Tesla all the time right now. It started, I think, in 2010. They got almost a $400 million loan from DOE, and no one talks about that. It seems like Elon Musk built it from the scratch, but he had a huge help from federal government in building whatever he has built right now. But again, public and private sectors need each other to survive. I think, hopefully there'll be more public-private partnerships in the infrastructure space, and hopefully us sustainability students can help with that.
And I could chime in here too with a few other thoughts, kind of bouncing off of that. I definitely think, as you mentioned, there is precedent for this, and this has been going on, and I think it's increasing, especially when thinking about, at least my experiences in the conservation space. 5 years ago, it was just a matter of communicating and saying, how do we bridge the gap between investment professionals and governments and scientists? And now we've already moved past that, and it's this is where the action's beginning to start. And I think what I'm most excited to see as potential moving forward is especially with some of these net zero goals we're seeing in government, and thinking about what innovative public-private partnerships that we could have to say, okay, how are we going to sequester this carbon, develop carbon projects? And that's something, of course, South Pole does, but I think we just currently don't have the amount of carbon projects in the world to meet all the net zero goals that people are setting. So I think there's this huge space for a lot of carbon projects to come in. I think public-private partnerships are a really key way of getting there.
I'll just add, from an engineer's perspective, if there's problems to solve and the best way of solving them is with these types of partnerships, then that should win. And the huge investment in offshore wind power, for example, off Long Island and other areas, it's obviously a massive undertaking with jobs, with utility involvement, with transmission, and that's the kind of partnership and multiple partners that are needed to make a project like that happen.
All great points. So that we're out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who attended and listened to this, and also thank you so much to our panelists. I really enjoyed this discussion. I feel like we did what justice we could to these complex issues, and I was pleased to sort of get a range of different thoughts from all of you. And I know I learned a lot and enjoyed your perspectives. So thank you all so much for your time and for coming and sharing some of your wisdom with us. And I'll leave it at that, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you to everyone.
Thank you for a great discussion, everyone.
Thanks.
This is great. Bye.